about the mandatory headings. These are the must-have items in your GIS 200 class project report. So what are the mandatory headings? These are the things that all reports are required to have. These are the sections of your written report. The executive summary, the introduction, the methods, the results and conclusions, and then the references section. First, we'll look at the executive summary. The executive summary should be the last thing you write after you've completed your project, made your maps, made your charts, made your graphs, made whatever you're going to make, analyze whatever you're going to analyze, answered whatever you're going to answer. Then you go back at the end and write your executive summary. It's very similar to an abstract. It should be one paragraph. It should be half a page long, no, not much longer. Probably at most, 250 words. Actually, when I'm saying half a page, that's probably single space. So at most, probably a page. Anyone should be able to read the executive summary and know what you did, why you did it, and what you figured out. And have a general understanding of the important parts of your paper without actually reading your paper. So just like an abstract, I should be able to pick it up, look at the title. As I start to read the executive summary, you should clearly state the question, tell me how you're going to answer it, and then tell me what it is that you actually discovered. And then around those three things, put whatever you need to make it read better and put together nicely. In the beginning, like it says, it should clearly state or explain the question of the problem, then describe the methods you used to solve it, the data required for the analysis, the output, and what it means. It must tell the whole story of what you did and why. 5 or 6 sentences is all the longer this needs to be, but it does need to, when I read this, I should be able to say, okay, this is what they did, this was their question, this is how they were going to answer it, this is what they answered it with, this was the answer they found out. If I can get those things from it, it's a well-written executive summary. Next is the introduction. An introduction should tell the background story of the project and explain why it's needed and why it's important. You should always follow. You should follow by introducing the question. And so after you've explained all these things, you should follow that up with what your question is. So you've laid this background scenario and you've explained why this scenario is important and why it matters, and then you're going to spring the question on me. And it should never read like, for my class project, I was assigned to write for the GIS 2. No, this should write like a professional report. And so write with the idea of the scenario that you're doing this to solve a question that was posed by a client or an interest group or some outside third party, but not something that you did to satisfy the requirements of a class. This section in general should be about a page long. You can adjust the content as needed to make the report as long or short as you need. What I mean by this is aim at about a page when you write it, and if you need to, you can always go back and add more introduction material into the background. You can always go back and tell me more about why it's important. You can always go back and add a little more color in your language, add more clarity and clarifying sentences and that sort of stuff, and make it longer if in fact you need to make your paper longer. And if when you're done your report is too long and you want to shorten it, this is also a good place to go back and look for ways you can combine stuff and remove things and still meet the general idea of what the introduction should be. Next is the methods section. You want to start off your methods section by clearly stating the analysis question to be answered. And you do that something like this. The proposed question to be answered was, and then state the question. And the very next thing you should do is list specifically how you plan to conduct the analysis. To answer the question, such and such data was acquired, and the data was analyzed by blah, 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 blah. Okay? If necessary, describe the process of how you use the methods to generate the information available outside of a GIS and how you plan to use that to make a decision. So what does that mean? Well, okay, imagine the squirrel model. And you know, habitat has an elevation component and a land use component. And so the shortest method you could write would be something like going to use a map overlay function to identify areas common to both elevations above 3,000 feet and land covers consistent with squirrel habitat such as red spruce and or northern hardwood forest. That's pretty straightforward. That'll be the shortest you could possibly imagine generically writing that out. Now, to explain that in more detail would be easy. You could start off by talking about the elevation data. And in that same scenario where I just mentioned elevation above a certain height and certain land covers, you could just say elevation and land cover, and then follow that up with, preferred habitat for flying squirrels is elevation above 3,000 feet, or whatever the number is. And then you can throw in a citation where that number comes from and talk about how all the habitat for this flying squirrel only exists above a certain elevation, and then list what it is. You then do the same kind of thing with the other one. Papers or publications by the blah 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 indicate that northern flying squirrels only utilize red spruce and northern hardwood forests for habitat, period. These particular forest types meet their needs for cover, for nesting, and for food, that kind of stuff. And then you could go on to say, to identify the right elevation, I acquired a digital elevation model from the United States Geological Survey. This data was in a raster format. It was collected in such and such a year. The cell size is this, the extent is that. You can go on and on about these things on both of these. Lastly, you want to elaborate on what you did to analyze the spatial data. In other words, I used an intersect function to identify areas common to both final data sources or something like that. You can throw in big words like I used a Boolean analysis to identify areas that were above or below the threshold elevation of whatever meters. And then I did, I reclassified the land cover so that every suitable land cover was classified as a 1 and unsuitables were classified as a 0. And then by multiplying the raster layers for elevation in this, I generated an output layer of 1 being squirrel habitat, 0 being not suitable. And so that's the kind of things you could do. This page should probably be, this section should be about a page long. If at the end of the day your report's not long enough, go back to number 4, the list of the data, or number 5, elaborate on what you did to analyze the data and how you allow this to how this allows you to answer the question. And those would be sections that you can go back and make longer if you need to. So again, how does this data allow you to answer your question? Okay, so think of the squirrel model. So I did this Boolean process where I identify elevations that meet my criteria, and land use that does the same thing. By identifying locations that meet both criteria, I can map out spatially how much area there is in every county that is in fact squirrel habitat. This is how you can go about actually explaining how you analyze the data. Last is your results and conclusions. This is where you describe the output of your work. This is where you refer to maps, tables, and or graphs that you included at the end of your report. Do not include items that you do not discuss in the analysis, and do not make analysis that's not supported by maps, graphs, or tables. Be very clear how items answer the question and how you intended them to be used. Discuss the solutions that you arrived at and how the analysis supports these solutions. Stick to the facts, be clear when you interject your professional opinion. Don't let your personal feelings play into a result. You should always try to give an unbiased opinion based on evidence. References belong at the end, and they list the materials used or cited in the document, including all the data that you use to make your maps. If something makes this list, it had better be referenced in the text or on the map. And I'll give you an example of what this could look like. Here is a section out of a paper I'm working on. It says knowledge of interactions between soils, fertilizers, and management practices is critical for sustainable agriculture and environmental protection. And then there's a parentheses, and then there's all the citations. McGuire and Sims, 2002, He et al., 2004, Harmon et al., 2013. Et al. Is Latin for and others. If it's two people, it lists both. If it's one person, it's just their last name. If it's more than two, you list the last name of the first person and then et al., just like it's listed here. Et space al period, and then a comma, and then the year of the publication. And then another parentheses, and then the period. And that's the format that would work. And then the citation for that, for example, I'll show you the one from my paper, the Harmon et al. 2013. It's Harmon MB. And so the first author, it's last name first followed by initials. And then all the rest of the authors, it's initials and then last name. So it's Harmon MB, J.A. Thompson, L.M. McDonald, E.W. Pena Yeftukivi, Jared Beard, and then the year of publication, 2013. Then the title, Phosphorus Translocation in Pastures on Benchmark Soils in West Virginia. Then the publication itself, Soil Horizons. And then the volume and issue information. And so it would look very much like this. Now I'm going to provide you, I already have, a link to a website that provides information on this. If in general you keep the format looking similar to the way it's supposed to, I'm not going to dig in and try to find nitpicky things to count it wrong. If it's not even close to this, I'm just going to count it wrong. Okay? Now, how would all that work? Well, say you got a map or a chart. You're writing in your text, and the whatever is whatever for all 6 counties based on the analysis of the data, and then after that you put in parentheses C table. In this case, I'll use 2.6. That'll tell me when I'm reading that I need to go to the end of the report and look for table 2.6 or 1.2 or 1 or 2 or 25 or 6 or A or B, or whatever you call the daggone thing. And then I go to the back, and there's the table. The first thing I want to point out is above the table, not part of it. So you make a line of text and then stick the table below it. The line of text will indicate the table number and then the title of the table. In this case, this is one from a paper I'm writing. It's called Table 2.6, Analysis of Variance for Sodium Hydroxide Organic Using Adjusted Sum of Squares for Tests. And then below that title is the actual table where I have all the different elements of the analysis of variance. And then lastly, at the bottom, you'll notice there's another line of text. This line of text is used to explain things in the table that are not necessarily clear. For example, in this table, next to the p-values, you see there's 2 asterisks or 1 asterisk, depending on what the score is, and that indicates p-values that are significant at a certain threshold level. In this case, 0.05 and 0.1. Now, you may not have anything relative or similar to that third arrow, but you might. Maybe you give me the title of a table, you make a table, and then underneath you have to explain what some codes, like maybe you have counties abbreviated and you have all 16 counties and you make a list of them or something. I don't know how you, that probably wouldn't be a really good way of doing it, but if you have something like that, you can always add that at the bottom of the table. And so that's the basics for how tables and figures and maps and charts. So if this was a map, you would have your map made with all your stuff, your scale bar, your north arrow, your legend, and everything, and the title in the map, like whatever it would be. And then when you paste that map in your Word document, above it, it would say map 1.0 or map 1, and then the title of what the map is. So that when in the text, when you're talking about the distribution of squirrel habitat across the southeastern parts of West Virginia, you could then put parenthesis C map 1. And then I would know that the thing you're talking about can be visually identified in map 1. I go to the back of the document, there it is. Oh look, map 1, great, makes sense. Checks off the box that you had a map and it was referenced, etc., and everything's great. All right, that's all for this section.